Abbie and I were living in Leeds. We were both in our late 20s, and I had just qualified as an architect, and Abbie had her PhD, so she was a scientist. Now, at the time, everyone around us were beginning to buy houses, have kids, get married and settle down. We knew we wanted to do that one day. We just definitely didn't want to do it. Didn't want to do it then. And also, rather frustratingly, I guess, we'd popped out into these careers we'd trained so hard for, 14 years of further education between us, and decided that wasn't actually what we wanted to do anymore. So much to our parents' dismay, we quit our jobs and bought one-way tickets to Australia with no plans whatsoever, which I can thoroughly recommend. Now, we soon found ourselves in Tasmania, which is a tiny remote island south of Melbourne, about 500,000 people. Most of it is national park. It's absolutely beautiful. While we were there, a tiny, unheard of distillery won the accolade of producing the world's best single malt whisky. This award had never been won outside of Scotland or Japan, so for this tiny Tassie distillery to win it upset the industry, upset a lot of Scottish people as well. Now, if you've ever been backpacking, to survive, you've got to be opportunistic. And Abbie and I felt quite behaving opportunistically. So we messaged friends back home with a whiskey blog when we found out about this distillery, and said, look, we're 20 minutes away. If you buy us lunch, pay some expenses, we'll go and visit a few distilleries on the islands, get you some blog content. They jumped at the chance and said, oh, crikey, yes, go and visit all 3 distilleries on the islands. We'll pay for everything. And luckily for us, it turned out there were actually 8 distilleries on the islands, which was amazing. So Abbie and I had this brilliant double life where we were living in a car. We were during the week and fruit picking, earning about a cent an apple we were picking. But on the weekends, driving out to these wonderful distilleries across the island and meeting some really incredible people. Now, they were producing whiskey. None of them were from Scotland. None of them had any experience. Virtually none of them had £10 million in the bank. Yet they were producing whiskey using locally grown grain in a really sort of honest, transparent way. And this whiskey had won best in the world, was being stocked in the world's best restaurants. Now, Abbie and I, when we quit our jobs and went to Australia, knew we wanted to work together. We loved our food and drink. We loved whiskey. We met these people and the idea began to snowball pretty rapidly. Now, again, if you've ever met an Australian or been to Australia, there's a brilliant kind of infectious enthusiasm. So when we told Australians, oh, so we've quit our jobs and we're thinking about building a whiskey distillery, they're just like, oh, good on you, mate. When's it ready? A pat on the back, off you go. There's no doubting. And that enthusiasm was pretty contagious. So we spent 2 years away working at breweries and distilleries in Australia. The guys responsible for producing the world's best ended up teaching us. They thought it was brilliant. We'd flown from Yorkshire, so just south of Scotland, the mecca for whiskey making, to the other side of the world to learn how to make whiskey, to go back to just south of the Scottish border to make whiskey. Now, for us, I guess it turns out that embarking on and embracing that adventure turned out to be the best decision we ever made. It gave us the freedom to connect with our adventurous side and time to explore what we really wanted from life, and definitely gave us the courage to follow through this vision, which was setting up a distillery with a difference back home here. So we returned in 2016 with a business plan, some grand ideas, an Aussie tan and a twang. Went to the bank and said, can we have a loan, please? We'd like to build a whiskey distillery. And they said, absolutely not. This is England. You're not from Scotland. You don't have £10 million in the bank. You've got no experience. So undeterred, we set about fundraising. We set up a crowdfunding campaign, raised about a third of our funds. We won some bids for EU innovation grants. So you'll see later in this talk, the way we distill our gin is pretty unique. The whiskey still we use is the only one of its kind in the Northern Hemisphere. We basically pulled this money together, bought a site, bought a building. Well, we bought an old stable block, which we thought would be suitable. I used my architecture skills, got planning on it. But when the engineer came out, looked at the old floor slab down and said, absolutely not, that floor slab's not strong enough, it needs to come up, which meant the building we'd just bought needed to be completely dismantled and sort of razed to the ground, and we built from scratch. Now that was friends and family pitching in. There's friends on the bottom left there. That was a stag do. I didn't tell them at what stage the distillery was at the time. I think they thought there'd be a lot more booze involved, but we managed to get the whole timber frame up in a weekend. So where were we? Back in 2016, fundraising for a year, spent a couple of years building, and we launched our first gin in 2018, so nearly 5 years ago. And since then, it's just been an absolute whirlwind of adventure. I mean, so from the business point of view, we've seen turnover increase 20% year on year. We've won a raft of international awards for design and for taste, and have worked on some pretty high caliber collaborations. So we work with some Michelin-starred chefs. We work with some world famous institutions like the Natural History Museum. For us, it's the sustainable ethos that underpins every action we make, and I feel has really set us apart in a very, very crowded market of over 2,000 English gins. You might ask, why the sustainable focus? On our travels, we were lucky enough to experience some of the world's most beautiful places, such as the Tasmanian Wilderness World Heritage Area and the Great Barrier Reef. We lived up in Queensland for 6 months as well. Though we also witnessed their destruction. So wildfires ripped through Tassie soon after we arrived, which was quite a terrifying experience. And we also spent, as I said, 6 months living and working alongside the reef. And that really opened our eyes to the damage that was being done to these really beautiful places. For us, it was only natural, I guess, that we wanted to create and preserve these places for future generations to enjoy, and we could use our business to do this. The act of choosing sustainability as the justification behind every business choice culminated in a key milestone being achieved in 2021, and that is we announced the production of England's first carbon negative gin. Put it simply, that means that every full-size bottle of our dry or herb gin removes 1 kilo more carbon dioxide from the atmosphere than it emits. This was a really lengthy and challenging process, but one that completely aligned with our values and has had huge ramifications for us and the industry. Through achieving carbon negativity, we're taking the lead to fight climate change and playing our part in helping Yorkshire achieve its mission to be the UK's first carbon neutral county by 2034. So it's a good 16 years ahead of the government's target of 2050. So how did we achieve carbon negativity? So first, you reduce the carbon footprint we reduced it as far as possible for the 2 core products. So that's where all the hard work is. The small footprint that was remaining, we offset with verified carbon credits to reach carbon neutral. And then we opted to offset a further 1 kilo beyond neutral, meaning more carbon is removed than emitted. And we can talk about carbon credits at the end, because I'm sure people have questions around this. We actually purchased twice the amount of carbon credits we need to make our claim, just in case any underperform. We've made the carbon report publicly available on our website, so there's an extract on the screen there. So we detailed exactly what we've done, how we achieved the footprint, what the footprint was, where the offsets were. We talked about tree planting, which I'll come on to later. And the aim was to share that far and wide and inspire others to follow suit. So please do go and take a look. It's updated every 2 years, and the latest release is due next month. So I am currently going through our verification process. If anyone's ever done a life cycle assessment, it basically means the biggest Excel document you've ever seen. And weighing every ounce of cardboard, plastic, paper, anything that moves through the distillery, I've weighed it. It's worth mentioning here that we are a circular economy business. So in a nutshell, that means stopping waste, improving efficiency, and looking after both people and planet. It's also a mindset. So it's about understanding the impact our business has on the environment and the damage it causes, and mitigating it with bold and decisive action. Now I'm going to delve into these actions for the next part of my talk. So the first one I'm going to talk about is food miles. We source raw materials as close as possible to the point of distillation so that we can support local farmers and reduce the distance that food's travelled. All the barley and wheat used in our spirits is Yorkshire grown. And I actually fulfilled a childhood dream a couple of years ago and went out and rode a combine harvester with a farmer about 10 miles away from here. The lavender we use in our dry gin is grown in Yorkshire. Again, it's just up the road, family-owned farm. The raspberries are all from Spillman's. And when we say things like, oh, we use raspberries in our liqueur, we don't, Yorkshire grown raspberries, we don't just use 1% from Yorkshire and the rest we buy cheap from elsewhere. 100% of the raspberries we use are from Spillman's farm. Closer still is the raw honey and lemongrass that we use. So that honey comes from our own on-site beehives. There's a picture of my father-in-law, Graham, there at one of the hives. So he is a resident beekeeper, and he is currently training up Abbie to sort of take over. And the lemongrass, now, believe it or not, Yorkshire lemongrass is a thing. So we have grown several years worth now of lemongrass in a polytunnel on site, and there it is, bottom left. We actually produced a lemongrass vodka for the Rattlehouse in York, which again was made with nothing but Yorkshire wheat and Yorkshire lemongrass. And it's still unnerving, I think, to have lemongrass grown in Yorkshire. Stopping waste. So after every distillation run, we send the spent botanicals to a fantastic bakery in Haxby called Haxby Bakehouse. And there is Phil there with his hands in the mincemeat he uses for his mince pies, which uses some of our gin. So those spent botanicals are used in things like mincemeat. They're also upcycled into breads or used as pastry glazes. The other thing we do with the botanicals, because we can't send them all to Phil, is we compost them on site. And if you've ever smelt compost with coriander and juniper in, it's pretty luxurious. It's amazing as it's breaking down. Now on the whiskey side, all the spent barley grains are sent to a local farmer. So he collects them every week. It's just been today, and they're fed to cattle. And then any other waste we have is either recycled or we shred it. So we've now got a shredder on site. So we shred all our cardboard packaging. And the tiny bit that's left is sent to a state-of-the-art waste-to-energy plant about 17 miles away, and that generates power for local homes. So zero waste is sent to landfill. Renewable energy is the other big one. So from day one, we've been powered by 100% renewable energy. It's considerably more expensive, but hugely reduces the environmental impact of our operations, and supports Britain's energy dependence and reduces reliance on fossil fuels. Now, saving energy and water is another area we focus on, and I've actually got a few videos here which I'll come to shortly just to show you some of the kit in action. Traditional gin distillation on a big stainless steel or copper still requires large amounts of energy and water. It's basically a very inefficient way to distill. So we've bucked the trend and are one of only a handful of distilleries in the country who distill under vacuum on rotary evaporators. So that piece of kit there with the blue column on, that is one of our gin stills. Traditionally found in a laboratory, it's something Abbie's brought over from her scientific days. If you come to the distillery and see it, where Abbie distills the gin looks like something out of Breaking Bad. It's very high tech. Now, that piece of kit has given rise to a 90% saving in energy use versus a traditional still. And they also save 26,000 litres of water a year thanks to a closed loop cooling system. So the blue liquid you can see in the column there is our condenser, and that is recycled over and over again. The other huge benefit of distilling in this way is because when you distill things cold rather than hot, there's a big benefit to flavour. So if you're distilling things like, I'll show you in the video in the middle there, we've got blackcurrant leaf grown up at Olstead at the Black Swan restaurant. If you distill that at 80 degrees, say the normal temperature for distilling, you're going to boil it and you're going to change the flavour. If you distill cold or at room temperature like we can, you retain all the freshness from those botanicals. And it's that focus on flavour that's led to these collaborations with the likes of Rattlehouse, Roots and Black Swan. We distill for Squash in York and many others. So that there is distillate. That is distillate coming off the still, condensing on the blue column there and putting in a flask. So really, to get a better idea of it, I think we should visit from the forest. So if anyone does come out, we can show you the full setup. Now, the last few actions we do, one of the big ones actually makes a much bigger difference than we thought, and it came out from doing the life cycle assessment, and it's the glass itself. So our gins are packaged in lightweight glass bottles. Now, most premium spirits will be in a really heavy bottle with a big, thick base on the bottom. And if you see in any bottle shops or a supermarket, you'll see the ones that have used that. You don't need to do that. It gives a perceived sort of premium look, but our bottles weigh 1/4 kilo less on average, and they're made from 55% recycled glass. So the simple things, if some bottles are made from 100% virgin glass, has a huge footprint. Yes, the bottle's completely perfect and flawless. Ours, you might get a few little bubbles in there, a few little imperfections, but it makes no difference to the flavour of the gin. So using that lightweight bottle with a recycled glass content just uses less raw materials, decreases transport emissions, and reduces the bottle's carbon footprint by 65%. Now, on the bottom left there, you can see a bit of a cardboard box. So we developed a clever origami style cardboard postal box with a local manufacturer based over in Leeds. And that has eliminated the need for any plastic or bubble wrap or those awful inflatable air sacs for any of our packaging. And again, it's hugely reduced our carbon impact. Any packing material we do need to use comes from the shredder, which I mentioned earlier. So when we get deliveries in from suppliers, we shred all their cardboard and then we use it to send our products out. Finally, on this slide, I don't think you can actually see it. So normally on the top of a bottle, there's a little like plastic seal, which is the tamper-proof seal, which you have to tear off or peel off. Now, ours are made in the UK and they're made from cellulose. I'm not going to lie, they're an absolute faff to apply. They come wet in a big tin, but they are made from cellulose and home compost in 12 weeks, importantly. In 2018, we introduced a very simple scheme, but it's actually the first in the country. It's a gin refill scheme. So you can see it on the screen there. We have one at the distillery and we've now rolled it out across a few stockists as well. So it's very simple. A customer brings back one of their empty gin bottles to us and we refill it and they save £6. It was an incredible headache to push through HMRC. We were the first to do it, as I said, so there was a lot of red tape, but one that was completely worth it. It's essentially a bottle for life, and it's really helped raise the awareness of the kind of reduce, reuse and recycle mantra. And we've seen uptake more than double in the last year for the number of people refilling their gin bottles. Now, the last big action I'm going to talk about, and there's a picture of me there out with a spade out in the Yorkshire Dales, is our tree planting. So in addition to our carbon offsetting, as mentioned earlier, every bottle of gin plants a square metre of native woodland, and that's through a charity partnership with the Yorkshire Dales Millennium Trust. We go out and plant those trees. So that photo was taken just a few weeks ago. I was actually out up on MC Moor yesterday planting in the pouring rain. And for a small distillery like us to have over 20,000 square metres planted so far is quite a big impact. And there's something great about doing something so tangible, and I know our customers really sort of, what's the word, appreciate that as well, I guess, because often you can see tree planting schemes and it's buy this item of clothing or plant 5 trees in a scheme, and there's never that transparency. But for us, having the transparency, having the trees planted in the UK was really important. That woodland creation is our way of investing in the future and doubling down on our commitment to the planet. So each square metre of woodland could lock away an extra 16.5 kilos of carbon over the 50-year lifespan of that tree, in addition to the 1 kilo offset from the bottle. The theme for this year's One Planet Week focuses on creating, protecting and restoring lands for the benefit of people and wildlife. So how does our work at the distillery do that? The 2 big tangible benefits that you can go and see with your own eyes are our woodland creation, and recently we've expanded our work with YDMT, the Yorkshire Dales Millennium Trust, and have begun to restore wildflower meadow as well, again in Yorkshire. I'll just briefly talk about the benefits of tree planting. So every single tree provides a huge range of benefits, whether standing alone or in a woodland. Woodland creation reduces flooding, sequesters carbon and promotes biodiversity. And I found out recently, every single oak tree can sustain up to 280 different types of insect. Importantly, woodland planting also creates outdoor spaces for communities to enjoy. So YDMT reach disadvantaged groups, including those from deprived inner city areas like inner city areas of Leeds and Bradford, refugees, asylum seekers, those suffering with mental health, also young carers as well, and give them the chance to experience and enjoy those woodlands we've helped to create. Now, those photos there on the screen aren't stock photos pulled off Google. They are photos I have taken and the YDMT have taken of the people and of the work they're doing. The visits really help people to feel happier and healthier, have provided opportunities to meet new friends and reduce loneliness, learn new skills and connect with nature. So those visits can include walks, gardening and also woodland maintenance. They're a great opportunity to get out into the countryside while also doing something positive for the environment. Now, the work we've recently expanded, as I just mentioned, was the wildflower meadow restoration. So while our two core gins plant woodlands, we have a vodka and a liqueur that now restores 1 square metre of wildflower for every single bottle we sell. And again, that's achieved by a donation to the YDMT. Traditionally managed wildflower-rich hay meadows are high priority habitat in the UK, but sadly 98% of them have disappeared, largely due to the intensification of sort of agricultural use. And the pollinators they support are facing a pretty uncertain future. The meadow restoration work blends conservation and community engagement and creates 3 key benefits. So the first is a climate benefit. So meadows are significant carbon sinks, and their diversity slows the flow of rainwater runoff and makes them resilient to climate change. Biodiversity, again, like the woodlands, so species-rich meadows support an astonishing range of wildlife and reduces habitat fragmentation. And then again, there's the benefit to people, so inspiring people to connect with meadows and empowering communities to look after our ecosystems will help to ensure the long-term sustainability of these habitats. So I'm going to talk about the triple bottom line. We're strong believers in the triple bottom line, and I believe for a venture to be truly sustainable, it needs to consider people, planet, and prosperity. And I've talked a lot about people and planet, but not about prosperity yet. So in this instance, I'm referring to the importance of profit. And that basically means, so as a business, we can reinvest that into what we do and grow. It is important to note here, though, that business growth does not have to be upwards. It doesn't have to be increased margins, increased turnover, increased whatever other metric you want to use there based on sort of financials. As a sustainable business, we recognise that growth outwards is also incredibly important. So that could mean expanding our tree planting scheme, developing new ways to have positive impacts, such as the wildflower meadow, or spending more time sharing our knowledge at talks such as this. Now, due to the sustainable ethos, we have been approached by and now work with all those names on the screen there, Natural History Museum, Selfridges, John Lewis. Those contracts have really helped provide the financial stability to enable us to thrive and continue our work. Now, we are small, but because of those names I've previously mentioned, we are growing fast and, importantly, inspiring change within the industry. We never set out to do that. We set out to produce great spirits underpinned by sustainability, but the knock-on effect and ramifications for behaving like that from the beginning have really surprised us. We've been invited to talks like this, distilling expos. I was interviewed for a program for Radio 4 on Christmas Day. We're hosting MPs at the distillery here to talk about our sustainable work. And one of them was probably the most surreal, was year before last, I was invited to talk to members of European Parliament on a Zoom call about the carbon negative work we've done. And there was something very surreal when you're sat in our tasting room, as I am now, looking at the Zoom screen, and there's 50 members of European Parliament there, and then there's us with our 7-minute time slot in an old stable block in Sutton on the Forest, so explaining how to produce carbon negative spirits. It was it was an eye-opener. So we've embraced those opportunities to raise awareness and share knowledge. It's important to note, though, it's not about being perfect, and far from it. It's about starting out with the right intentions, going in for a learn, and making meaningful changes. So we're always finding ways to improve and always questioning our own choices, but also inviting feedback and criticism. So we wouldn't have put that carbon report online if I didn't want you to actually go and look at it and ask me some questions. We attended a Yorkshire Post ran, I think, their first sustainability conference. Could have been last year or the year before, and I went and spoke at that and had a talk. Absolutely grilled at the end of it, which is fantastic. That's what we want. If anyone can find anything or makes us think and ask questions, and there's always a better way of doing things, and we're not doing everything perfectly. We know that, but we're always trying to improve, which is really important. So I hope this talk has given you an insight into what can be achieved with a sustainable ethos, a positive mindset, and a strong vision. The more of us taking action and making sustainable choices now, the greater impact we can all have on creating, protecting, and restoring land for the benefit of people and wildlife. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris. That was absolutely fascinating and really interesting to see the range of things you're actually doing, and the sort of the strong enthusiasm you have for all of the things that surround your production of this spirit. Now, if people have got any questions, if you'd like to type them into the Q&A section, there's the menu option at the bottom of the screen, and we can put those to Chris. And I realise that some people may well be typing away, so I will use chair's privilege, if I may, and just get things started by asking a question of my own. I was really interested that you're very careful in selecting local produce using local suppliers. I was wondering how much that actually limits your capacity at the end of the day, because there are only so many raspberries or whatever that can be grown by a single farm locally, and whether there is therefore a limit to your growth that is defined by your choices.
Yeah, that's a really good question, and I guess potentially yes, there is. But I think what we're finding, say working with Spillman's, we've built up a relationship now where we'll be talking to him, we'll be telling him what we need in our forecast for the year, and he's making sure he has that ready for us. So I think a lot of it, if you've got good relationships with those suppliers and they can kind of grow or tailor what they're doing to meet your demands as well, that seems to work really well. But you are right, there might get to a point, you know, we might have a huge contract come in and we physically can't buy that many Yorkshire raspberries, which we would have to be, and we would be completely transparent about that. But luckily at the moment we're all kind of growing together, and we're not facing that problem. But what is interesting is, so obviously things like the raspberries, there's lemongrass, there's basil, there's lavender, there's things we can use and source locally. Juniper at the moment we buy in, and that's grown on mainland Europe. Now we are trying to reduce our reliance on things we're having to import. So on the juniper front, we've actually planted our own juniper bushes here. We've got 30 bushes out in the woodlands here. And again, we've talked very openly about this. It's great having juniper bushes now, but they take 8 to 10 years before they throw a crop. So I guess when you're building a whiskey distillery, you have a much longer term plan for everything. You've got patience. So in 8 to 10 years, maybe we'll have enough of our own juniper as well. But yeah, they're doing all right, but a bit of a wait.
Thank you. So I've got a couple of questions from people coming in, both on chat and on the Q&A. We've got one asking about your electricity. Do you produce your own electricity, or do you buy renewable off the grid, or do you do a mix of both?
Yeah, so at the moment we're buying it off the grid. But we work with a provider that only produces 100% green energy. So we were with Haven. Now this is again a really interesting one. So we started partnering with Haven, and they were 100% green, and they only ever produce green energy, because you can buy into green energy tariffs. So you might be paying a little more for green energy, but 90% of what that company produces is burning fossil fuels. But they'll say, oh no, you know, we've got some green energy for you. So it was important for us to have a company that only produced green energy. Now, Haven have now been bought by Drax. The Drax still have some legacy accounts where they're burning fossil fuels. So it's this continual, you're always trying to do the best you can, and things are always changing. So in light of that, in light of the fact that Drax now behind the scenes aren't just producing green energy, even though we're still on the green energy tariff, we have just recently had a quote to do the entire roof in solar. So our plan next summer is to put a huge solar array on the roof here, which provides something like 75% of our energy needs. So yeah, again, it's always a sort of shifting landscape, and we've never, that's when you think you're all sorted, you're on top of it, there's always something else to change. But yeah, I hope that answers the question. Yeah,
no, that's the way with sustainability. I think it's a field of innovation by its definition as you go along. So the other question we've got here is in terms of your consumers, do you find they are being influenced by you in their way, in the way that you are developing your eco thinking, or are you actually finding you're being influenced by them as well?
I think it's us influencing them, because when we first started, which as I said was only 5 years ago, maybe at that point 10% of our customers were interested in the sustainable side of what we were doing, and maybe 90% weren't. Something happened during COVID, and that seemed to flip. And now on the trade side of things, a lot of those names like Selfridges, they came to us purely because of the sustainable ethos that we've got, because they're trying to behave more sustainably themselves. We've even just been speaking, we're now supplying British Airways of all people. There was whatever your thoughts are on flying, some people still need to fly every year for work or whatever reasons. You go to an airport and you want to buy a gift or anything, there is nothing there produced on the whole part by any business acting particularly sustainable. They're huge mass produced brands. So BA has seen a gap where there's now a few sustainable spirits supplying into airlines and duty free, so consumers can actually spend their money on a product that will make a difference. And on the public side, we have people obviously refilling their bottles. The amount of people have told us, oh, we've planted rosemary bushes now so we can garnish the gin and tonics with it. So yeah, I'd like to think, yeah, we are having an influence outwards. It's not so much that people are questioning why aren't we doing certain things, so we're responding. I think we're being very proactive and keeping ahead. And
in terms of these large buyers, British Airways, are they happy to understand? Yeah, are they happy to buy from a small supplier? Again, it's back to this issue of your capacity can't be as great as a large commercial company.
Yeah. So yeah, a really good point. The volume, they're great names to be working with, but we're not producing, 20,000 bottles a month coming out of the distillery for them. It's still a very, very small part of their overall offering. I guess it will just be interesting to see when the British Airways thing just started just before Christmas. Selfridges has been about a year. It will be interesting to see how that grows and how that relationship changes. At the moment, and we've always been very resolute that we're not going to budge on the tree planting. A pound a bottle is donated to tree planting. And we've been very forward and honest with those people we're working with, saying, yes, we're not going to be the cheapest and you're going to have to pay another pound a bottle because we are maintaining the tree planting and we're not, not going to give up on that. Now that might, I guess, just thinking, these are good questions, but I haven't been asked this before. Maybe we fast forward a couple of years and the volumes have increased and they're like, right, we're buying X amount now, we need to get that cost down. And that's the point we walk away and say, we can't do it.
I mean, there's a question come in which sort of links with this very much about talking about sacrificing profit for outward growth and suggesting, would it be beneficial from your point of view for the government to use levers like corporation tax to financially force the triple bottom line behaviours across the board? Or do you think there are other good alternatives to waiting for ethical behaviour to develop from producers and companies?
So was that about using corporation tax, sort of rising corporation tax to make sure these profits are spent on other things before they're taxed, basically? Is that what you're getting at there?
I assume so. Yes, it's a question in the chat. Let me just in the Q&A. But yes, you're right. It is.
It's what we've seen over the last couple of years. We have seen some really big change, say in the spirits industry, with how the bigger producers are now behaving and what they are doing and saying, and whether some of it is just tokenism or you've got some of the far bigger producers beginning to donate to some of these schemes, beginning to tree plant, B Corp, 1% for the planet, beginning to sign up to these initiatives. And I guess they're having to do it now because it gives them a market advantage. And I think that's the materialistic, or that's the society we live in, right? Isn't it? They're not just going to do it. I mean, we did it because we went backpacking and we're quite idealistic and came back and thought this is the way to do it. And it was very hard to grow the business for the first few years because no one else was valuing that. But now that shift has happened, and those bigger companies are beginning to behave more sustainably. And the British Airways is an example. Yes, they can say we're partnering with these producers. We probably make up minuscule amount of their turnover. But I don't think that matters. The more brands like us on the shelves talking about it, the bigger companies beginning to talk about it, just raising consumer awareness, it's kind of going to build that critical mass. So I don't know. Yeah, I'm not sure the answer to that question. It's a very good one. But it does feel like change is happening, and it's not just in our industry.
Yeah,
but then
sorry, go on.
So I was going to say that obviously, as all things, comes with its problems. So the Competition and Markets Authority, I think last year, announced some guidelines around greenwashing regulations, because there's many companies out there promoting or making green claims, but without any evidence to back it up, or overinflating them to drive sales because they know that sells. But these new regulations are coming in, and they're beginning to enforce that and beginning to question that, and it's getting called out more. And we had it recently with a competitor, where we had to question them and say, I hope you've got some data to back that up, because it's quite a big claim you're making. And then they did, and then we've talked about it and we've moved on. So yeah, there's a lot of greenwashing out there still, unfortunately, but I think as these regulations sort of develop and maybe get a bit more clout, and can probably make some examples and penalize some of the bigger companies, that yeah, people will begin to keep making these claims but have the data to back it up, which is good. If they're making the claims and got the data and actually doing what they say they're doing, then that seems pretty good to me.
Yes, it's encouraging more people to behave like yourself in that sense,
Yeah.
which is for the better. So, okay, completely different topic, but somebody's obviously spotted on your photos about the tree guards, and has said, how are you getting on with the tree guards?
So yeah, the tree guards, so YDMT were brilliant. They got some grant money last year to trial different types of tree guards. So the millions of trees that have been planted across the UK at the moment, or over the last several decades, are all in plastic tree guards, which then need to be going and retrieved, because they're there's millions of pieces of plastic out in the landscape. Now, YDMT have been trialing, I think they've got 3 or 4 different new materials for tree guards. And from what I learned recently, the one that's winning it at the moment is made from, was it cashew shell resin and some sort of vegetable oil or something like that. So they do degrade eventually in the landscape. There's other ones made from sheep's wool. There's a few on trial, but I think what they've found so far, I mean, the Yorkshire Dales can be quite a brutal place, and some of them just aren't surviving and are degrading far too quickly. But funnily enough, it's the company who produced the plastic tree guards. It's I think the founder's son who has branched off and is now producing these ones using the cashew shells. And they should be, if they're not in production yet, or they are very soon, and I think they're the ones so far that seem to be the front runners. But again, it's like we were talking about earlier, it's continual. Planting trees is great, but we've also put 10 million pieces of plastic out into the Dales, which is slowly disintegrating. So yeah, they're getting there, making progress.
Yeah, I think we've got woodlands around York on campus that we've been planting. In more recent years, we've been collecting the tree guards back in, and recycling them.
Yeah,
that's the other way of dealing with the problem that's there, sort of thing. But so another question's come in. Get you to think freely on this one. If money and time were no object, what would you like to do in terms of business and for furthering sustainability?
Oh, if money and time were no object, that would be a thing. So one thing we have talked about is we're planning on expanding here at the distillery over the next couple of years on the site, and I think one of the things would be to bring people in and maybe not hold a conference, that sounds so dry, but to bring in and to have workshops and to look at ways of growing lemongrass in England, of growing juniper, of sharing ideas and knowledge. I think that would be really interesting to do and would have a great benefit as well. What else could we do? I'm not sure about that one. I mean, what have we got? We've got tree planting, we've got wildflower meadow. There's another one there's another project we're working with, which I can't talk about at the moment because it's linked to our whisky launch at the end of this year, but we have expanded again and are doing something else fantastic with the YDMT. No, I don't know. I quite like having constraints on money and time because it makes you think innovatively about things.
So I think we've covered a range of topics, and we've covered the range of questions that have come in. If anyone's got any more that they'd like to ask Chris, then please feel free to just yeah, there is one that's just popped up, which is, in terms of the trees, what's the plan for actually looking after them? You say you plant them, well, I mean, it's the carbon offsetting trees as well, isn't that, as well as the ones you plant yourself? So what's the maintenance and management of those going forward?
So the ones planted here with the Yorkshire Dales and Trust, they are maintained. So that's, I should have mentioned that. It's a very important thing. They're not just planted and left. So we also go out and do the woodland maintenance day. So that is replacing guards, that's checking them, looking after them, replacing dead ones. So yeah, that is fully maintained, which is another great thing about working with the Yorkshire Dales Millennium Trust. It's not a cheap way to plant trees, obviously, because you've got all the manpower to plant it and then that maintenance, but very important to do. On the carbon credit side, we have a silvopastoral scheme we've invested in Uruguay. So that's livestock farming and afforestation. That we have met the owner running that, so we had a Zoom call with him again for transparency to meet him and talk about it. He manages that there, and we aren't involved with that. It's kind of more arm's length, which gets me onto an interesting point about carbon credits. They're kind of the best solution, one of the best solutions at the moment, but there's always stories, there's always controversy about carbon credits not performing. There was a big expose in the Garden recently about a whole set of credits that weren't performing or had been miscalculated. Now, interestingly, I had been looking at, or we wanted to procure carbon credits for projects in England, because then there's much more tangible. We could go and visit it. We can visit the site. But carbon credits in England, I think it's called Woodland Carbon Code, is a very, very new setup. There aren't many mature credits, and a lot of the carbon credits available in England are kind of essentially IOUs. So you're investing into a scheme which will offset a ton of carbon in X number of years, which is kind of what the tree planting does. But to make any sort of claim about being carbon negative now, you need to buy a mature credit, and currently they are all available overseas. Now, there is another option, which is the Climeworks, which is a company that basically extracts carbon directly from the air. It's quite sci-fi, I guess. They're giant fans. They're pulling air through and extracting carbon out. That is still in its relatively early days. It's a very, very expensive way to offset carbon, but it is something we are looking at bringing into the blends, because it's important, I think, not just to rely on, and some companies do, to make environmental claims just buy a load of cheap credit somewhere and just hope that's going to be enough and that'll be all right. So that's why we do the tree planting here. That's why we've got some carbon credits abroad, and it's now why we're also looking at this direct carbon capture as well. So you've kind of got a blend. So if anything does underperform, you're still covered and you're still saying what you're claiming. So yeah, still staying true to it.
Belt and braces approach, which is
absolutely.
I mean, yeah,
exactly.
In the sense of removing carbon from the atmosphere, you can't. Over caution is better than not, definitely. But brilliant, thank you very much. And as I say, I think we've probably got to the end of the questions that have been asked. Which thank you for. Another one coming in. No, it's just that people aren't typing as fast as I'm reading, I think. So it was just actually a suggestion. Would seagrass planting be a more immediate way for carbon offsetting? Is there a company these days that actually plants seagrass as a carbon offset?
Yeah, there is. I was reading about this recently. I know there's sea grown. So there's a company based out of Whitby or Scarborough with a planting and harvesting seaweed for food use. And I can't remember if they've got some carbon data about what they're doing and about something you could buy into. And there was something recently I was reading about seagrass planting, because again, that's a great carbon sink. It grows really fast as well, doesn't it? It's very quick. No, that's a really good one. Thank you. I shall add that onto my list of potential projects, because there might be a Scottish or English scheme. So I'm going to write that down. Thank you for ever suggested that.
And the other suggestion that comes through, actually, there's a further comment on that, which says that Yorkshire Wildlife Trust is planting seagrass in the Humber, apparently. And actually, I do recall that. I do recall them talking about it.
So that's the Yorkshire, right? Okay.
In their magazine. But the other comment that was made was that, and it comes back, I think, to who's influencing whom in terms of sustainability. Is one of the things that you're encouraging your consumers to do is by your example to be more sustainable. And somebody suggested that plastic freedom is and I'm not sure whether it's a website. I assume it must be. It's a way to find more products which are doing similar things to you and trying to reduce their impact in terms of their packaging.
That's brilliant. We know that we're stocked with plastic freedom. So yeah, they're a website and a fantastic Instagram following and encouraging and making products available and making sort of them aware, making consumers aware they exist. So yeah, we work with them very closely. It's a great suggestion, whoever put that in.
And I think, and it's very similar to sort of the thinking on climate change and the biodiversity crisis. That I think one of the things to help people get to grips with this and to understand more about it is to keep talking about it. So and for people to spread the word about what they're doing and what other people are doing, so we can all find out and learn from each other about it.
Definitely. And I think the thing that fascinates me about, I mean, we're just producing gin and whiskey, you know, but for something so simple, and it'd be the same for there's a North Star Roast over in Leeds, fantastic coffee roasters. There's lots of great examples of food and drink and products, I guess, produced in Yorkshire and across the UK. And on the face of it, it's very simple. It's ethically sourced gin or coffee. But I guess one thing when I was writing this presentation, and it said Joe earlier, sort of over the course of weeks been working into it, you realize how deep those threads run. You know, you end up working with the likes of Haxby Bakehouse, who are, you know, we supply the gin for the mince pies, and they've been working with Regenerative Farmer this year for the flour, and it all kind of links in and all begins to build. So yeah, you're absolutely right. More of us talking about it and shouting about it, and we'll slowly get through.
That's brilliant. Yeah. So thank you very much for your presentation. I think we have gone through all of the questions finally. But and thank you everyone for contributing to your questions and for coming along here tonight. We've got the last couple of talks happening tomorrow at about lunchtime and in the evening, if you care to join us for those. But in the meantime, thank you very much to Chris for a fascinating talk. I've learnt lots, and I hope everyone else has too. It's been recorded, so if you want to share it with your friends so they can find out what's going on, it'll be on our YouTube channel early next week. But thank you very much, Chris, for your talk, and thank you everyone for your time.
That's quite all right. Thank you. And do come for a visit, come for a tour, come and visit and see what we're doing.
Yeah, I'll cycle up the road. That would be great.
Good stuff. Thank you, everyone. Cheers. Good night.
Bye.